It's so refreshing to see movies like Ballerina being made. I know I haven't seen the film yet. Nobody has. It's only the trailer that's been released. But the cinematography for these kind of action flicks like John Wick, Ballerina, it's so refreshing to see it in a lot of ways because there's a little detail across cinema that sometimes is used appropriately and sometimes is not. But really, it is kind of the secret sauce. It really is kind of ground zero for making your films, making your footage, making your cinematography very beautiful. It's simple to understand, but oftentimes it can be difficult to execute on. It just depends on the environment you're in and the kind of lighting you have. The cinematographer for the Ballerina film was Roman Lecurbis, and he's a French guy. He's worked on things like Witcher Season 2, but this is his next project is Ballerina. To reveal the secret, it's basically color difference. If you've never heard of that or you don't understand what that is right off the top, it's basically saying like what's in your foreground, what's in your background, how are those being distinguished from each other, and in the image does it have color difference. And so there's a lot of examples of different colors and color differences in the trailer for Ballerina. So close to the top of the trailer, we see a close-up of the actor's face. It's very shallow depth of field, and its all focus is on the eye. And you see this blood that has been caked onto the girl's face, and the rest of the environment is completely white. So if you take a look at the shot before this, the whole environment is very cold. It is very white. It is very unsaturated. And then you get that shot of the blood and it really pops. It really brings attention to itself. So color difference is kind of key when it comes to crafting this. In this case, they contrasted the white, unsaturated environment with the very saturated red. There are other ways to do this with lighting. So in a shot like this, the foreground, which is Ana de Armas, the beds, and everything is contrasted to that very cold blue window in the background. So it makes this color difference stand out. There's multiple colors. The whole frame is not this warm tone, but it actually has that pop of blue, which creates a very nice, visually appealing image. We go to this shot. I really like the composition whenever you do wide centered framing. And at first glance, this just looks like a top-down lit shot of a ballerina in dance mode. However, if you notice and you look closely, you can actually see the face of Ana de Armas, as well as you can see it on her legs and her hands. You can see this warm glow illuminating the features from the side. So it's not just a top-down silhouette, cold lighting. You also have this warm lighting hitting her from the side. This is a really interesting shot compositionally. I won't get into all of that. However, it's pretty obvious to see the color difference in this image. You have the green tones on this brick wall where there's a light source that's reflecting some type of green color mixed with going deeper into kind of this tunnel or wherever this location is. You can see all of these orange warm tones. So it's contrasting orange with green in the same shot. And the only difference here is this corner. It not only creates depth to see that there is depth to that wall. It's not just a flat surface with the color difference, but also it creates a nice color change from left of screen to right of screen. This was very interesting because although the environment is very hazy and it's very blue, there's this really bright light coming through the windows up here. That's like the primary source of light for the scene. But what was interesting is in the design, in the costume choice, they chose to wear these really bright red geese. It contrasts really harshly with the blue environment to where they really stand out in the images. Again, color difference can be achieved in a variety of ways. A lot of times the easy way to do it is if you have a handful of lights that you either have gels, which is like color sheets you can cover the light with so it changes the tone, or if you have LED like bicolor lights, you can essentially create that color difference from your foreground and background. But in this case, it's interesting to actually include that color difference not only in the lighting, but contrasting it with the costumes of the characters. So there's a lot of interesting ways to achieve it. You can get more dynamic when you get to close ups, but when you're doing really wide shots and seeing a lot of the environment, you have to get creative with your color differences. And so it's a really interesting approach to actually make the geese like bright red as opposed to something like white or black that would just kind of mix with the blue and it wouldn't stand out as much. This is kind of like the iconic shot for the trailer at this point because compositionally it's very interesting. There's a lot of leading lines all across the frame that kind of pushes you to look at the center. And the color difference here is obviously that pink and blue color. It's kind of easier to get away with color differences in environments like clubs or wherever this might be because there's naturally a lot of dynamic multicolored light in clubs. So it doesn't stand out as much. It's kind of what is expected in the environment, but it's still a good use of color difference and it does create depth and draws your attention in a very bright, colorful way to the center. This is a bit more subtle, and this is actually another aspect to lighting that I think is very important for people who are creating dynamic lighting and color difference to understand, and it is the use of shadows and shooting on the shadow side. The motivated light is obviously windows. There's not a ton of color difference from the foreground and background in this image. However, the very harsh light on Ana de Armas's face on one side reveals where the light source is. And it shows us in this image, although we don't see where her specific light source is, we see what type of light source her face is being illuminated by. And it is simply a window because it shows us a window with that same light temperature and basically the same brightness of light in the background that her face has. So it's showing us in the background, hey, there's a window back here. It's the same color temperature as what you're seeing on Ana de Armas's face. So it can be easily assumed that although the one behind her is not her light source, it is backlighting her. There is probably a window that is right next to them that is illuminating the face. And when you're going to use a natural looking source like a window to illuminate the face, you want to make sure you shoot on the shadow side. So basically, if I have a light hitting here, put the camera on this side so it's looking at the shadow side of the face. You don't want to put a light right here, illuminate this side of my face, and have the camera on this side. It gets more depth. It creates more dynamic lighting if you shoot shadow side. So if you imagine a line in the image, try to stay on the line that the shadows are on and shoot from that angle. I wanted to bring this image as an example of something that I honestly, when I noticed it, I wasn't too impressed by, because what I'm seeing a lot in this image is kind of like messiness from digital LUTs. And I'm not the biggest fan of LUTs. I think LUTs kind of push your image a little too far. You see the blood splatter on the floor. You see the blood on the blade of the ice skate. And in the shadows, you see this kind of bluish tone where shadows, in my opinion, should be black. Like that is the correct way to light and color grade your image, is to make your shadows actually black like we see them in real life. But there's this really bluish bleed into the shadows that kind of tilts them towards blue, even though they should be black. And that is caused primarily through LUTs. Now, granted, a color grader could push his blues too far and it happened naturally, but skilled color graders that work on movies like Ballerina don't necessarily do that. However, when you just slap a LUT to get the look of everything, it kind of messes up the grade in many cases. There's not so much color difference in this image like we've been talking about with like greens and reds or blues and reds or pinks and blues, right? However, I did really like this shot because it is sort of a unconventional way to set up an obvious shot. There was a very clear idea in the concepting room of saying, what if we have a flamethrower and a fire hose shooting at each other and creating this visual battle of hot and cold, trying to fight each other and see who wins. And so this top down look was very obvious and I think a very good choice. What I was interested in when I saw it, besides the obvious, is that they actually chose to create an angle to it to create shapes in this image. So in this image, it is compositionally set up to have the flames and water kind of be hitting each other at an angle instead of like center. So for example, you could have the flamethrower guy in the center over here and Ana de Armas in the center over here, and they're going straight across the frame and kind of splitting the frame in half. But they didn't choose to do that. They chose to turn it and create this angle effect, which causes there to be two triangles. If you use that flame and water as your line, it creates two triangles in the image at the top and bottom instead of two rectangles splitting the image directly in half. This is towards the end of the trailer when it's revealing the John Wick character coming into the story. And so I liked, again, the shape that it kind of creates a triangle with the really bright bluish light source. However, the color differences are interesting because you have off to the side this little house that has little pockets of light in the windows and the street lamp. That source is supposed to be casting a warm glow onto the ground right here, which is creating this shadow that the character John Wick is casting into the foreground of the image. And so I like the color difference. It's very bright blue. It's very strong with the blue light source, the main light source. And then there's a little pockets of warm tones in this image, while a lot of the image is actually hidden in shadow. I wanted to take a look at mid-fight scene because this is going to be an action film. A lot of it's going to be fighting. And so I'm like, what is the amount of effort put into the dynamic color difference and lighting for fight scenes? This is one where Ana de Armas's character is fighting a couple of guys, and it's interesting. It looks like it might be some kind of bar, kind of grunge, mid-century modern style set, and there's a lot of warm lights scattered around the room. However, they chose to illuminate the actors in this very dull green tone. I'm not really sure where the light source is from the fast-moving action to create that green color, but it's interesting to say, all right, we're going to have warm tones in the background and create, kind of bring out that rich wooden vibe of the room itself, and there's little pockets of warm everywhere. And so instead of just putting them in warm light as well, we're going to do color difference by putting them in green light that kind of washes out the whole fighting scene area and causes that color difference between green and warm, them in the foreground and the bar and wood tones and walls in the background. And finally, just to take a quick look at one of the close-ups from the trailer, it's actually interesting to me. Again, they shot shadow side, as I mentioned previously. And so they have the exposure on one side to create very hard contrast. It makes it very dynamic. It creates a mood for the environment that the scene is taking place in. But what was interesting is also the color difference for the background, because there's not a lot of texture in the background. But what they did is it looks like there's a corner in the background, as you can see right here, sort of off to the side behind Ana de Armas's head. And one side of the wall is green, as we've seen before, and the other side is a very rich red. Again, this is a way to create depth. It's to show the angle of the wall, that there is an angle here, and that one side of the room is receiving one light source and the other side's receiving another. Instead of her just having kind of this mixed green color tone that's the same as the wall behind her, you also get the warm angle from basically the rest of the room as it opens up to a new light source. And so even in this close-up, it's creating color difference with not a lot of texture, not a lot of context in the room walls behind her, but creating color difference to make it dynamic. And engaging to look at. So what is the secret? What if you want to make your cinematography look better, if you want to watch films and understand what makes them look so incredibly good and attractive and you can't really put your finger on it, I would say make sure you pay attention to color difference between foreground and background. It separates the foreground from the background. A lot of times there's going to be either color differences there or there's going to be amounts of light difference there. So the foreground might be brighter than the background or the background might be brighter than the foreground, but essentially you don't want your foreground and background to be the same color and the same exposure. Otherwise, they kind of just get mixed and blend together and it looks cheap. So to create dynamic lighting, the secret that so many cinematographers use is color difference. And so when you watch your next film, try to spot it, try to see if you can notice everywhere where they're doing color difference in their images. I really appreciate you watching this video. Please like if you enjoyed the analysis and breakdown, and subscribe to the channel to see more videos like this, as well as movie news and reactions.